All right. Well, the message at my end says we're now live. So,
Okay. All right. Welcome everyone to the resumption of our WLJA Radio Common Law Under God broadcast, March 28th, 2024. Um, Hosting or co-hosting will be Frank Raffaelli, um, and guests include Ron Armstrong in the lower right and um, Keith in the upper right, Keith Villawardo. Um, okay. I want to it's been like 6 months, I think, since the last time we broadcast. And we're going to complete what we're doing about alternatives to being enslaved to the system, by as far as water, food, um, uh, travel, um, and electricity, and now we're dealing with communication tonight. Just want to give a short prayer. We're not unmindful that there is um, yet another anniversary of the day of the great evil, or the great earthly evil, coming up tomorrow, which the world calls Good Friday, and now barely acknowledges at all, except as a legal holiday. I think they just call it spring break now. The forces of the adversary have sought to trivialize or pervert enormous um, miracles uh, of our Heavenly Father, and including particularly the ones performed during those 3 days more than 2,000 years ago. Um, all of this because of your love for us, Heavenly Father, who we've demonstrated daily we do not deserve. And we hope to get back in your good graces by a process of repenting and disengaging from the enemy. In Jesus' name, we pray for your guidance tonight. Amen. Um, just a resume, just a quick summary of what we did for the previous 6 months before we went on hiatus. The first two broadcasts, for those who want to look at our archived shows, dealt with the common law system of resolving disputes between people. This is based on the Matthew 15 through 17 model. And this is not a total solution. It was never intended to be a total solution for us. It just provides one of the means, a major means, of disengaging from um, from the chains that bind us through their so-called justice system. And you can see a lot of what we talk about there in episodes 1, 2, 15, and 18. If we had more people, we could certainly do a common law grand jury also, so we could have a prosecution and we could start to vindicate uh, some of the common law and other crimes that have been committed against the people in violation of the Ten Commandments, among many other violations of God's law. Episodes 3, 13, and 14 dealt with the slavery and in the form of human trafficking and in various forms. One area of enslavement tends to bleed over into another, and another one of the areas of enslavement is through taxation, which we address in one form or another in episodes 5, 10, 11, 12, and 16. 5 also deals with, I actually meant to refer to that as the brainwashing. And taxation would be nothing without brainwashing, of course. Um, Then there, episode 17 dealt with attacks on our health. We had another episode, but we couldn't really talk about the attacks on our health in connection with the JAB over the last couple of years. That was episode 9, but we still have it, but YouTube won't allow it to be broadcast because I said the C word. Um, then there's the use of the perversion of our right to travel as another form of enslavement, which we dealt with in episode 19. And then my personal favorites, which I think are the important ones uh, for us to wrap our brains around and stop feeding into. Um, we dealt with in episode 7 and 8. Um, I think we will never be free until we understand that all non-defensive wars, which is like 99.999% of them, are in fact just mass murders. And so we have to stop glorifying war as we have been doing. We have to stop funding it. Um, we have to stop making an idol of those who promote it. So that's pretty much where we've been, and intend to continue along these lines and address, the needs that many of us have. And the big one, of course, is communication, which I think I said in a lot of the promos for this, is um, would not be such an issue if we were living as godly people, as godly people originally were living within their own decentralized communities. You communicated with other people with your God given abilities to speak. And it was not a big deal. There were couriers that, as the areas that people felt that they had to expand into, it got larger. There were ways of communicating with people who were more than say a day's camel ride from you. Um, but we've gotten way beyond that, and we expect that now. And so it's gone from being a need to a want, and so yeah. Uh, I have here with us a couple of experts on, electronics and electricity and how to use those in connection with communications, including alternative systems when, not if, the system goes down. And I'm going to introduce Frank, who's hosting this, and we appreciate his stepping up to the plate and actually volunteering to do that. That pretty much never happens. Um, so we appreciate that so much. Um, okay. Frank is a microwave communication system designer with an emphasis on radar and aircraft navigation, avionics, microwave receiver design, and chip design. He's developed altimeter systems for the Black Hawk UH-60 and Apache AH-64 helicopters, as well as radar spoofing technology for the F-35 Lightning and F-22 Raptor. Previously, Frank developed car radio chips for Ford, audio chips for Samsung, utility meter reading receivers for Aclara, radio frequency systems, and keyless entry devices. He earned his Bachelor of Science from University of Michigan, emphasis on microwave technology in 1984. In 2018, he earned his master's from U of M, specializing in digital signal processing. I don't know what that is. He'll tell us, I guess. And AI. He was an adjunct lecturer at U of M for 4.5 years. Currently, Frank is director of engineering at an Austin, Texas startup. Um, Frank also has an interest in ham radio and among other things that we have talked about before in connection with all the injustices that go on in the fake corporate tribunals they call courts. So, and also we have Ron Armstrong. Didn't ask him to give me a CV, but he could fairly be described as an Ohio inventor, and he has described himself as a former shade tree car mechanic. He's very interested in alternative forms of transportation that would be much safer, much more user friendly than what we have. And Ron has talked to us about that in the last few broadcasts, I think, before we went off air for about 6 months. So I'm sure Ron will have much more intelligent questions to ask Frank um, about various alternative um, communication uh, avenues that we can go down. Uh, before I shut up, now I just want to mention that um, initially, when I was researching this, the first communication systems seem to be dealing with or seem to have been necessitated by warfare. And there were all kinds of primitive techniques that used the flashing signals using the sun, and these would be limited to how far the sender was from the receiver, of course. So you had to be within a line, a direct or pretty direct line of vision from whoever you were sending to. So, okay, well, I will get off of this little spiel and ask Frank to get started with what should we, in your opinion, be doing at this point to get ourselves um, more, uh, well, not only uh, independent, but communication independent from the existing systems that we're using, which is mostly like internet. Go ahead, Frank.
Well, thanks, Catherine. Um, so it seems a little ironic to be talking about this over an alternative system, talking about an alternative system over the internet, but
Yeah,
that's kind of what we rely on now.
yeah,
I I always wonder, so where we would be. Uh, I mean, it's been a long time. We've had the ability to communicate with electronics, and I mean, ever since ever since we started sending, telegraph signals, it's not even radio, right? It's just a wire, and you don't even need a wire. You could use a string, and like the old tin can experiment when we were kids. You can still get, a talk from A to B, and most folks don't know. I mean, the way the old telephones work, you could take like a little speaker and wire it up and connect that to another speaker, and one person puts that to the ear, and the other person can talk through it. You're not using any battery power. It's just the power of your voice is going over the electrical cable and then comes up on the other side. So, and with telephones, there wasn't really an assist. There was just kind of a background DC power to kind of activate the microphone in the phone. So there wasn't any radio being used. And then I'll say we, I wasn't around, but when we say we invented radio, we called it radio, and then they changed it they started with wireless, then they called it radio, and then they called it wireless again. So and now they're back to calling it radio. So everyone knows what we mean. But it was supposed to make it easier, and I'm only I only know some things about technology. I don't know much about the sociological events that led up to it, or the some of the other historical events. Uh, but I do know about the Communication Act 1934, so where the federal government allocated or basically declared that radio waves, radio spectrum was like federal parkland. That's the wording that's used in the in the document. In that, we should protect it, we should keep it available for the public, and it's a very valuable natural resource. So they recognized back then, and since then we've changed it a bunch of times. 1969, it got changed a little bit, and fast forwarding to a modern era, um, a lot of that spectrum was sold off. Now we still have Wi-Fi, things that are free. That's in a couple of small bands, but most radio we have to pay for. And most recently, a lot of that spectrum was reallocated. Uh, Catherine, you might use the word seized to from well from us. It was ours, but it used to be part of the television broadcast spectrum, and then it became used for commercial. Well, private corporations own it now, so it's not private, public corporations, I guess, but we don't.
Well,
And
wasn't this a natural phenomenon that the people calling themselves the federal government took over? And whenever they take over anything, it's always for our own good. It's to protect the public. It's to protect. It's always for a good reason. But was there actually a good reason to have ever done that?
eminent domain.
Well, eminent domain. Was that the justification? Because that's not a justification right there. That comes from the Fifth Amendment to their Constitution, and it just says we can grab your stuff if we say it's for a good reason. That's all eminent domain is. So if that was the only justification, then I don't think they had a justification. But was there some other reason, technologically speaking, that we would have had a bunch of chaos or something with people using the wrong frequency, interfering with other people's frequencies? And was there anything like that? Any practical reasons that there was a need for some centralized authority to take charge?
I don't know. So I Because I haven't really brushed up on all the amendments to the Communication Act. I'm sure there's some logic or some rationale given in there, um, but nowadays it's more. I don't know why if folks expect it, but we used to have 83 television channels, and this is as of the 1960s when they added UHF TV. So we had 80. I'm sorry, that's wrong. 82 television channels. So channel 2 at the beginning and channel 83 at the top. What is that? That's more like 80. Yeah, that's 82 channels. And so we had the channel 1 was an old channel that was seized, and it was actually given to the ham radio folks. so so we had channel 2 through 83 for a very long time, and now we have channels. Um, well, the lower channels have gone away. We have right now at this moment we have channels 7 through 33. So
What
that's what
happened
we've got
to
left.
what happened to the rest of them?
They're gone. I mean,
They're
they're
gone.
used mostly for 5G. So now it sounds funny when you say it because 5G is, and I worked for a test and measurement company for 13 years, and we were doing a lot of we were providing test instrumentation for the companies that were on the 5G consortium, and so I was involved in a lot of those meetings, and they were telling us what they needed. and they were telling us the results of their experiments in 5G. Um, and that's sort of like what sounded promising about it, right? So let's get more bandwidth, let's get people, more networked, and it sounded very well. It sounded good, like 4G spectrum was starting to fill up, and those are it's kind of like saying Kleenex to say 4G or 5G. It's just words. It meant a certain collection of frequencies, a way of broadcasting and encoding that data so that we could share, multiple, they call UE, user equipment. That's what a cell phone is called, a UE, user equipment. And so you could share multiple UEs and get better networking and better, fewer drop calls, that kind of thing. So it sounded like a good plan.
Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
And
Back up a minute. You said it's like Kleenex for a specific trademark, you know, name being used as a generic description. So was
well, I mean,
there
it's yes, yeah,
when 5G came about, was that under the control of some monopolized corporation, or when
I don't know.
4G came out, was it subject to some some corporate entity that had a monopoly on it?
Well, there was a lot of money that went to the federal government starting, the big flow of cash started in the early 90s, and to buy up chunks of spectrum, but it's still going on.
Well, so that is a so the corporation calling itself United States at that time, or United States Inc., or the United States Corporation, whatever it was then, had control over it and probably had shares, you know, shares of stock in it. I imagine that it was selling.
Yeah, I wish I knew more about those aspects of it. So I, but the from the technology aspect of it, I usually refer to the advent of 5G as welcome to 1967 because it was supposed to be a more advanced technology using microwave and millimeter wave communication. And in some respects, it was. It used some new spectrum, and it worked. It worked pretty well. But the tests that were done, they were done in the lab, and they found over a period of time, and they weren't able to meet the goals that they were advertising for 5G and technical goals and
Well, what kind of
feasibility.
goals were they looking for that they didn't meet?
What the advertised goals were, getting a lot more, good range, a lot more signal, a lot more bandwidth and capability. And that was supposed to come from the higher frequency aspects of 5G, the millimeter wave. And the millimeter wave worked, but it only worked well in the lab. So, for example, if I would take my handset and set it down on a marble coffee table, it would stop working. So, and that doesn't happen with 4G. It just happened with the new 5G with the millimeter wave. And if I'm walking around and talking to somebody and changing my orientation, it didn't track very well. So it would drop calls in reality. In the lab, they had more control conditions, and that didn't come up. So when they were faced with now, this part is my conjecture, but it was a coincidence that, I mean, it coincided in time that it became obvious that millimeter wave part of 5G was failing and not delivering what it was supposed to deliver, and then the television channels got seized. So those two events were coincident in time.
Keith is asking, how about the Watts lines in the 70s? And the digital age increased with the smartphone in 2008. Analog television ended in 2008. Any comment on any of that? Um,
Well, I know about analog television because I was working for a television chip company at the time, and we were real interested in making sure that everything was compatible with digital television. And so there's nothing wrong with analog TV, but they found with digital TV they could uh, get more signal, higher resolution into the same bandwidth. And it seems logical that we would make advances over time and improve our ability to communicate. Um, so the extrapolation was we're thinking, okay, well, we have these 83, 82 TV channels. That means each one could hold the equivalent of, 3 or 4 high definition channels. That's a whole lot more channels. But the now that we have only 33, it still seems like a lot, but it's less spectrum space. So that my
Okay.
only comment on analog TV is digital TV is more spectrum efficient, um, but so that should have, this is my opinion part, that should have resulted in more spectrum for us to use, but instead it got used for something else that was a pay service.
That was a pacer. Was that
Pay service, I'm sorry.
a paid service? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Isn't that always the way?
I don't know.
It's
Yeah.
So,
always their way.
Yeah.
so I don't know what you had some really good questions, and I probably missed most of them, but I think I'll be quiet for a while and let other folks talk.
Yeah. Well, I just noticed what Keith was posting on the chat. Can you see the chat, Frank?
Oh, now I can. Yeah, sorry
Oh,
about that, Keith. I didn't see it earlier.
yeah. So, did you
Give
have
me a
any
second here.
comments, Ron?
I had a question I was going to ask him, and it's a little off topic. Yeah, I'm curious, Keith. You're familiar with the book The Invisible Rainbow? Are you familiar with
Ye-
that at all?
I think I've heard of it. Invisible
I'm
Rainbow.
sorry. I'm
Frank?
sorry. The question I'm sorry. I was referring. I was trying to get Frank's answer. Not that I didn't want to hear from you too, Keith. It's just are you familiar with that guy's work at all?
I'm not, and I think you asked me this before. Sorry
Okay.
about bringing up the. Hang on,
Arthur Furstenberg. Yeah. So,
what's it about?
Well, the gentleman's position is that when all of these technologies started to appear, for example, the telegraph, that the appearance of nervous disorders appeared at the same time that the telegraph is almost in lockstep. And in the book, I don't want to recite the whole book to you, but he basically made the inference that those two things were related because of the frequency, the electrical frequencies they were using, or it was exposure to electromagnetic fields that human beings hadn't adapted to yet, and that's what was causing those things. And I was just
I
that's
just wanted
interesting.
to jump in there with, this is not a new notion that electricity, novel uses of electricity, although I guess it's a natural phenomenon, but when it's used, you know, um, the technological applications of it have been known to cause health problems. And you listen to Dr. Thomas Cowan, and he
Mhm.
indicates that what what was being called the Spanish flu in the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, or well, actually early 19 teens, was probably a result of the lowered immune systems of people exposed to the toxins of WW1, the toxins of, we're talking chemical toxins of industrialization, and um, all of a sudden, all this electrification of the cities and the resulting magnetic fields and everything that goes with that. And apparently, our bodies have adapted to it, or those who couldn't adapt to it have died off since then. A lot of people died, apparently, of the so called Spanish flu, which had nothing to do with Spain. Um, but
Well,
anyway,
I think
so
this question
it's
is
not,
whether
it's not a
this.
novel notion that electricity can adversely affect, unusual applications of electricity around populations can have deleterious effects on health. That's not really new. That knowledge has been suppressed, I think, but it it was known. So Brian, go ahead. You were saying that apparently, what Furstenberg was exposing about the 3Gs, 4Gs, 5Gs.
I think he did go into that a little bit, but he's basically saying that any change in the electrical background has pretty much resulted in a wave of health issues. Um, a lot of that is centered around 60 cycles per second we use for alternating current. And I guess if I were to pose a question to Frank, how hard is it to modify the frequency of alternating current? What would be involved with that? Or is that something that would take a completely different method of production? Or could you do it with by some other means? And the reason this is really not my wheelhouse. I'm not really that familiar with electronics or anything electrical. I was just curious what your thoughts would be on that.
Well, it's a little to the side of my understanding. I used to teach a class at University of Michigan called, well, it was energy conversion, but it was not a class, it was a lab.
Okay.
And we did, so we worked with electric motors, big ones, the kind
Mm-hmm.
that, like a couple tons and bigger. But they're for both using and generating electric power. And that's how they used to do it. And still do in a lot of generation plants is these big synchronous motors, and they're spinning at a certain rate,
Mm-hmm.
and coupled with the way the motor is built and the rate they're spinning is what gives you the 60 cycle frequency.
Okay.
And so like Europe uses 50 cycles, and we're locked into 60 hertz. Sorry, I say cycles, hertz interchangeably, but
Mm-hmm.
it means the same thing. If we were to change the frequency, we would need to refit a lot of the transformers that are on
Okay.
telephone poles. The reason for that is they're designed to work optimally at 60 hertz,
Okay.
more efficiently. I mean, some of them could work at a lower or higher frequency, but they might not work as efficiently, which means they might heat up, they might burn up. I don't know. Depends on the electrical load. But that's the extent of my experience about that. Why would
Okay.
we change the frequency?
Well, that falls back on Arthur Furstenberg. He's of the belief, and like I say, I don't know this firsthand. He's of the belief that 60 cycles per second actually isn't the healthiest frequency as far as the fields that this electric current produces. Um, in fact, what is it he said that appeared with 60 cycles per second? I'm trying to remember what the health condition was. Um, but at any rate, yeah, I was honestly just curious as to whether or not something could be done in line. In other words, something comes into the house, there's a box or something you hook up in it, it would change the frequency. But I imagine that would probably interfere with a lot of the operation of what. Well, here's the thing: if you have a television that's designed to operate at 60 cycles per second, changing that would probably interfere with the normal operation. That I'm going to assume.
Not most TVs. They're because they're lazy, right? And so when I visited Samsung for a week, and most of the televisions used to be made at a company in China called Shosako, and the second highest rate of television production was in Turkey, a company called Vesta, and the third was Samsung. That was my snapshot about 16 years ago. And Samsung and LG are making more now than they were, but they make some of those at the Shosako plant in China. So because of all that, and because TVs are distributed internationally, they're, I don't want to say lazy, but kind of lazy in that it's just easier to make the TVs compatible with all world power systems and not worry
Okay.
about where they're plugged in. I just want to make sure that they work.
Okay. This question, this might sound a little off the wall, my asking this. Let's say hypothetically, you had a small community and it was running off of an APU generator like you'd find on an airplane, and that
What's
is
APU?
the auxiliary power unit.
Oh,
My understanding is that those operate about 400 cycles per second.
they do.
That's very very high frequency. Now, would it be easy to operate that community off of something like that, or would you have to forego using a lot of electronics? Oh, yeah, Keith made an interesting point there with the smart meters, but
That's a really good question. So the reason airplanes, I do know why airplane avionics uses 400 hertz originally, and this is from a long time ago. It's because so they can put transformers to transform the voltage, and the transformers are much smaller when you're working at 400 hertz than when you're working
oh,
at
okay,
60 hertz.
okay,
Smaller and lighter. So for avionics, that was a big deal. Still is.
okay.
So they call it SWAP C, size, weight, and power and cost. So that's what the military acronym means.
Oh, okay.
Size, weight,
That's
power, and costs is SWAP-C. So
wow.
no, it's a
Okay,
big deal on everything that goes in aircraft.
okay. Well,
Question about um, as far as reducing health effects and the practicalities of using not having alternating current at all, having direct current, and there are places where there are users that have been appliances and so forth that have been adapted for direct current. It seems like that would be less intrusive to the human body, perhaps. Anybody have any opinions about that?
well, that's actually something I would bounce it off of Frank. Um, as far as the utility, I guess, of direct current appliances.
So I think you're going to find the technical answers about direct and alternating current a lot less interesting than someone who could offer what the health effects might be. I don't know anything about the latter, but I do know that when I was I was asked to help in a community of Moreland Hills in Orange, Ohio. Um, there was a lady who was real active, and she lost her job over it, unfortunately, but she was really active in advocating against putting a cell tower at the elementary school campus there. It was Pepper Pike, Ohio. Sorry, that's where the meeting took place.
Okay.
And this was years ago, probably 20 years ago. But and I wish I had the little sticker. I have it around here somewhere. She made up a lot of little buttons with the radio tower on it and rays coming off the tower, and it was meant to, gather a lot of people to this city council meeting um, and to discuss it because they were going to go ahead with this tower, and AT&T and T and Sprint both wanted it, and they were co-located. They'd co-located services on the tower, and she was concerned because the construction of the building, the where the sixth graders were, and that was her kids, were on the top floor of the building, and the antenna was right over here. And so along the bore side of the antenna was the sixth grade class, and something about that just didn't seem right to her, and so she didn't want it to happen. And I don't really blame her because it was actually true because they were screwing up that installation. They're not supposed to place, things along the bore side of the antenna, not just because it makes the signal less effective in that direction, but because the well, I said in the meeting with the group I called the group of angry moms because there was a really big group of angry moms in that room, and the mayor and the city law director were there, and I ran. Turned out so was the press, and so I found out later. And so all I did was I read from the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 47, and I read what was permitted to put on top of the towers, right? And so they're allowed 12 co-locations at 1,500 watts apiece. And when they measure power, they talk in terms of effective radiated isotropic power, which really means how much power are they getting straight out the bore side of the antenna. It's not real power, but anyway, it's effectively how much are you being exposed to. And those antennas work in a way that I wish I had the picture with me. There's a local installation here that where they screwed it up too, where they put the antenna too low. But anyway, this was that same problem, right? So they had the antenna was too low and too close to the building. And it doesn't work as well for the signal. You're trying to get the coverage. It doesn't work as well for that either. So that's the part that surprised me, not the part that they were caring or not caring about the sixth graders. But the angry moms took care of that, and they never put the tower there by the school. They put it, across the street. But I just read from the book, and you could have 12 co-locations at 1,500 watts a piece, which I pointed out was kind of like defeating the safety switch on your microwave oven and leaving the door open and
Being
sitting
exposed to the
down the path.
magnetron.
Right. Well, that's not an exact equivalent, but it's closer than the AT&T folks were doing. There was one lady there from AT&T who was clicking a garage door opener near the other lady's head, and she said it's like this, right? You don't feel that, do you? That's not that much power. I'm trying for an exact quote here. So it was it was pretty bizarre. I thought, of course, it's not the same amount of power, and I cited a study, and this was all I knew. And so the interesting questions come from the people who want to know about the health effects, and I don't know anything about that. So I cited a research work at the time, which I had looked up, and it was Dr. Henry Lai and his business partner or his colleague at University of Washington. I can't remember his name, but Lai is spelled Lai. So if you look up Henry Lai, you'll find a lot of interesting stuff there. Some experiments he's done with rats. This was a long time ago, and I just cited that stuff. And the press was there, and they said, "Can we talk to you?" And I talked to the press, and I was quoted in their newspaper as uh, saying that rats' brains were exploding,
Oh,
uh,
well,
which
okay.
which I didn't say, but that's how I guess that's how the newspaper guys interpreted what I said. But what the research was about, they were looking at DNA strands and the ability of DNA to reproduce itself faithfully before and after the exposure to the electromagnetic energy. And I thought that might be somebody who would know something about this stuff. Talking about the angry moms in that room. And Catherine, you and I have talked about him a little bit. He's still around, Henry
Oh,
Lai. Yeah, so it might be an
okay.
interesting guy to talk
Yeah.
to because there's where the interesting questions are. I can't answer any of those interesting questions about health effects because I know nothing about that, only tech.
Well, I know that there have been various bio initiatives that have found that the smart meters, for example, are known to cause cancer and other radiation associated illnesses. Uh, and all I know is, um, as well as environmental degradation. In other words, it has an effect on the pollinators uh, in the area, and which can have indirect effects on agricultural production. Um,
You mean bees?
and other
That's
pollinators
one of
and other
them.
pollinators.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not the only ones.
Uh,
Um,
so there's a guy in Milan, Italy, who did a research study on that, and I happen to know this because I met him at a trade conference. I'm going to look up his name because he's on my LinkedIn. Cristiano's his first name. I'm trying to remember his last name. And I didn't understand what he was talking about when he first, but he gave a really great presentation on that because he actually put tags on bees. And he was trying to find out if their migration pattern was changing in an area where they were exposed to higher levels of electromagnetic energy. And it was a study that was actually funded by the university. I'm trying to figure out which university he works for. Give me 1 second and I'll get you his name and info. Because I think he's still doing publications on this. So again, I apologize. I have to refer you to people that actually know something because I know nothing
well,
about this.
that's fine. That's fine. You know, we
Certainly
all plan
appreciate the effort.
Yeah, give me 1 minute. Just
because I think
getting.
the point is that when these decisions were made, when the so-called safety testing happened with smart meters, for example, they only tested the thermal effects. You know, would it actually burn you up?
Well,
um,
yeah, you're right about that.
and when
So
they had reason to know from decades old research that there was way more to it than that, and they were just playing stupid by ignoring that in their research efforts. Oh, we did safety testing. No, they didn't. Not meaningful safety testing, even though
I'm
there was every
pasting his
reason.
name in the chat. It's Cristiano Palego,
Okay.
uh, and Cristiano is the guy that knows about bees and electromagnetic energy.
Well,
Well,
I
he's
don't know. I mean, this is all very interesting, and it exposes more about what the bad guys are doing to us. But and it's important to know if we're looking for alternatives outside the system, what we don't want to duplicate their their screw ups, intentional or otherwise. But I'm not. I never really wanted our broadcast to be so much about exposure. A lot of people have done a lot of work on that, and and we expose constantly in our three notice process. We tell them you're doing this and this and this and this. If we're wrong, tell us how, and they never do. Um, but I just want to see about if we actually got a divorce from these people, and you know how how effective could we be in establishing safe, or at least safer, communication systems than what they've been handing to us. That's all.
I'm gonna I'm gonna show you a link. It's Radio Mala, and this was done by. Let's see if I can share the screen. Let me see what this will look like if I share the screen. This was a project that a friend of mine did. It was all funded by well, it was funded by private people. I was one of them, and but he put this whole thing together. Let me show you what it is and what they did. So actually, a real public service saved lives, and he got a he got recognition for it, which he didn't want. He didn't care about that. He just wanted to do something. As he's from Nepal. Let's see. How do I present? I'll share a screen and give me a moment because I'm struggling with technical details.
You would think that with all this endangering of our health, with all these innovations, at least they would give us something that actually worked well and was user friendly. But no, don't even have that.
So this is Radio Mala, and the picture kind of explains what they were doing. Every a certain this earthquake that happened already. When was it? 2015, 2017. I apologize for not knowing the year, but this was a really tragic earthquake in Kathmandu. The thing is, they knew it was going to happen, right? Because it's happened it happens on a regular cycle because of the way I guess some geologists figured it all out, and it happens pretty regular, and so they could predict it within a couple of years when it was going to occur. And my friend Suresh, he put together this network, all using ham radio stuff, and they're actually using it to call ambulances and everything else because the main communication network went down. So there was nobody had a cell phone that was working or anything else. There was no internet, no Wi-Fi, no nothing. Just this network that my friend put together, and it was really just amateur radio, a combination of amateur radio operators and amateur radio equipment, and that was donated by various donors. And they did the job, and they got the emergency network up and running within moments of the earthquake happening. They had done a lot of dry runs, a lot of tests already, but it worked, and they used it to save lives. So that was a big deal. Suresh wasn't really even that big into ham radio, but he knew that could help, with the process. I'll stop sharing this so that we can talk better.
Could could could, could his system achieve communication throughout the island among the
Well,
people
it's
there?
not an island, but it's
Or
yes, is that's what happened. They were getting communication across the country of Nepal with this network.
so what kind of an area are we talking about? How what kind of distances? And in Nepal, they have there's a lot of mountains, so I imagine that would get in the way.
So that presented some challenges, right? Because it still was the type of frequencies they were using are mostly line of sight communication, like the old days with the light signals and all. But
Yeah.
they managed to get pretty good coverage, and it was a little easier in some of the big cities because the big cities are in like a big bowl, and they're not like there's not like a whole lot of mountains in the city, so they could get communication in places like Kathmandu, and they would locate the transmitters on tops of hills or peaks, near mountain peaks, and they would get better coverage that way. But still dealing, they knew all the effects of radio and propagation, and they were still able to set up a really nice, effective network. That was the main point.
It was effective, and did it use any questionable technology as far as what we suspect about health effects?
I think we can question anything that's radio from from the standpoint of Henry Lie's research. He really equated it to a combination of frequency and power. So certain frequencies were more susceptible, and of course at higher power levels. But that's his research, and I don't I I'm probably not the right guy to talk about that directly.
Well, that's encouraging. That's encouraging. Uh, of course, what what I seem to keep running into every time we look at um, getting ourselves removed from their system, it's our solutions seem to be inconsistent with the global economy. There's just something. I don't know. I mean, certainly as far as communication, I don't know. Of course, with a system of relaying, maybe we can keep the global aspects of communication that are similar to what we have now, or better. Um, but uh, I mean, I think when it comes to anything we're trying to do, marketing of food, it's never made any sense to me to have a global economy in food production and marketing. That's never made sense. Why? That seems extremely inefficient, and I suspect that it's probably any kind of solution that we're going to find where we remove ourselves from their centralized systems is going to be can't also be centralized and achieve what we want to achieve for it. That makes sense.
Very much so.
So um, anyway,
I have a
well,
question. Oh, sorry,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Ron.
I had a question for Frank, and I kind of wanted to cover this, before this is gonna be another kind of off the wall question. Is there a type of antenna that exists? And I'm going to describe the antenna. I mean, it would work the relationship between the radio transmission, or the antenna would basically transmit the radio waves the way a laser transmits the light in a linear, coherent fashion. Does that make sense to you? Like it's made like like an extremely directional antenna. Does anything like that exist that you know of off the shelf?
Yeah. So I um, so I design antennas for radar systems. How directional it is depends on aperture, and so aperture is a fancy way of saying how big does the antenna look to the radio wave. So
Okay.
so it's a ratio between the physical size of the antenna aperture and the uh, wavelength of the signal that you're trying to transmit. So if you're trying to transmit a very low frequency signal like AM broadcast, for example, it's more difficult to make that directional in a small space. So
Okay.
that's why you see, like, even some of the single AM radio stations, if you drive by, if you know where they're located, you can drive by them. You see sometimes multiple antennas on site, and they're spaced, you know, hundreds of feet apart, sometimes the big towers. The reason they're spaced so far apart is they're trying to make that directional because their nighttime broadcast, their license might require it to, point in a certain direction or to avoid a certain city that has another station on the same frequency because they travel further at night. So uh, that's why they look so big. These giant antenna farms may be just for a single radio station. Um, for FM radio, it's much smaller because the frequency is shorter, and for that was the attraction. That was one of the reasons that the supposed to be the selling points of 5G is the frequency is so high. It's easy to make. They were calling a pencil point beam, right? So to beam the signal exactly where you want it and not waste power elsewhere, right? So on this phone and on many phones, the antenna is, so when I hold it, the antenna is behind my palm on the
Okay.
lower part of the radio if I'm holding the radio right side up. The reason they do that is because most people, when they hold a phone, you've got a gap between the antenna and the phone. I mean, between your hand and the phone. And so,
Okay.
because your hand would absorb too much energy if it was flat against the phone like this, but most people don't hold a phone like that. And if you're holding it like this, they were going to put the 5G antenna up here, right? And move the camera to the side and put the 5G antenna up here, the millimeter wave antenna. And then it would look, for the best signal and point that way. The best signal might be a reflection. Sorry, Catherine, I'm bouncing the phone around. You're hearing some strange audio on your end. But anyway, so the location of the antenna, if you peel all these layers off, you would just find a piece of metal on the back there that forms the antenna, and it's not very directional. is a short answer to your question. Is it
Okay.
kind of like envelops the area with signal in all directions. And if you try to put this phone in a some kind of a Faraday cage or something like that inside of a six-sided box to restrict its signal output, it won't because the phone will adjust the power up to keep the call. So you'll still get the same amount of power outside the box that you would, and you just use up more battery. So so it's
So I guess what you're saying
you
is
know
it focuses, the signal is focused, it becomes more focused and directed if you were to put it in a Faraday cage. Am I understanding you correctly with that, or?
no, it only adjusts the power. It might
Oh,
try to
okay.
adjust. It doesn't. This phone, this 4G phone only. Um, it doesn't really do much to adjust the directivity of the antenna because there's not really
Okay.
much it can do.
Okay.
So, but the 5G phone is supposed to do that. It just doesn't work.
Okay. That's it. I think
Now,
you answered my question.
to be accurate, it works. It works if you're like on a bus, a public transport, and they've got a 5G uh, a 5G
A
node on the
repeater?
bus, a repeater. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
And if you got a locally got a repeater there, then it'll work okay if your distance is short.
Okay. That's okay.
And
That answers my question.
and it'll try to direct its signal toward where it thinks is the best signal. But the best signal might be off of a reflection. So you don't know. It's just what it thinks is the best signal, and it'll keep steering around until it finds it.
Okay.
But
Okay.
um, so I think, Catherine, I think you wanted to talk about some alternative methods, and that's where your
Yeah.
question was headed. And I'm sorry I derailed it.
Right. Yeah, I'm just wondering about the cheapest way and safest way that we, the people who live in a certain county, for example, that I don't know what the dimensions of counties typically are, want to be able to communicate with others in their county cheaply and safely. Because I think if we're going to implement some of our other strategies for exiting the matrix, what's going to be most important is not our communication with people on the other side of the world, but our communication with people in our area. And fortunately, that seems like it involves less difficult technology to achieve, maybe cheaper and you know easier to achieve. I mean, um, what do you think? I'm thinking of Ross County, Ohio, for example, um,
I
which is
don't know what
supposed to
happened
be
there.
one of the largest counties in Ohio, in area. Um, what would be, an I wonder how cheaply you could actually build a system that people could use within their county.
That's a great question. And so there are some free and some nearly free solutions. And you and I have talked about the different types of walkie-talkies, the GMRS walkie-talkies, and the FRS bands. So those are designed for uh, personal use, and some people even use them for commercial use. They are inexpensive and they work pretty effectively up to a couple miles or so. The ham radio methods are also inexpensive. Um, Ham radio is a licensed service, but getting a license for ham radio is a lot easier than people think. The advantage to getting a license, besides the fact that people normally wouldn't come and confiscate your equipment, is that you get a lot more support from other hams in your area, which turns out to be a really big deal because they can get you connected to, anyone, anywhere that you want to be connected to, anywhere in the world. So what I mean by that is you can use their repeater networks. They're both local and extended beyond local regions. So if you wanted to communicate from where you are to Texas, that'd be a real simple thing without spending a lot of money.
Yeah,
And
but we're trying to get away from getting a permission slip from Satan's minions. So, I'm looking for something that does not require a license currently. I mean, we can fight with them over that they're not entitled to demand a license, but I would rather go with less resistance. And I'm looking at this article that talks about multi-use radio service frequencies. Um, they're assigned 5 channels, are allowed to operate at a maximum output of 2 watts, similar to FRS radio's output power. They have a
right.
longer range than FRS radios due to their lower frequency. They're often used for outdoor activities such as hunting, camping, and business communication. One of
Right.
the critical advantages is that no license is required, I guess, as of the writing of this article.
Yeah,
Um,
if you don't need to talk globally, then those are some really good options. Another really good option, let's say if you just want to set up your local community with a long range Wi-Fi, right? And
yeah.
that and you want Wi-Fi. Now, so somebody has to connect to an internet backbone somewhere or something else. So we're still talking about using, infrastructure. But if you wanted to
Why,
make
why would
sure
the
that
why would the internet have to be involved?
it doesn't, kind of skipping topics here and skipping around.
Okay.
So if you had let me do this one backwards. I'm going to show you the antenna first. So this is so when I show this to people, sometimes they think of it as a fondue pot, right? So because it looks kind of like a fondue pot. So just ignore this top section for a second. And this middle section you can make out of a food can, tin can. And if you cut the slots at the right angle and at the right length, then all you do on the inside of this is you put a single stub of wire. It can be paper clip or whatever. So this is one of the cheapest antennas that you can make that would give you a really good long range communication. Because what it does is it flattens out the signal and broadcasts it to the horizon. This particular one would work in the 2.4 gigahertz 2.4 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi. And so you could set up a little ad hoc network in your neighborhood. This would be good for a couple miles or so. And so if you wanted to get communication within an area on a band that's free, this is one way to do it. And you don't need these reflector lids, but that just improves the range.
Because
So
you get a range of up to 20 or 50 miles.
you can get more range, but you'd have to do more along the lines of what Ron was talking about. You'd have to build a bigger dish, and you would have to direct the signal in a certain direction. This one's omnidirectional, so it has the advantage of giving you quite a bit of range, but in all directions. And so if you know who you're
When you
talking
say
to,
quite a bit of range, what are you talking about? About how much?
2 to 4 miles depends on terrain. And that's with lower power though, right? So that's using equipment that you'd be able to run license free on Wi-Fi bands, like a watt of power. It's not a lot of power. I mean, considering that broadcast signals use hundreds of thousands of watts,
Is there
and we only get 1 watt.
megawatts?
That's
Question, Frank.
yeah.
Did you fabricate that antenna that you just showed us? Was that something you made, or did you buy it? I'm just
No, I made one
curious.
like it. I bought that one at a Hamfest for $10.
Oh, okay.
The one that I made doesn't look that pretty. So
But it doesn't have to be pretty to work. I mean, that's
exactly, yeah. It doesn't have to be pretty to
you're
work.
yeah, that's an anthem of guys, pretty much. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to work.
That's right. Exactly right. So, and all you need is just the right. We we could share plans of how to build that thing, and things like that. There's a lot of bands available that are not licensed bands, like Catherine, like you were saying, like the MURS, the FRS, and the GMRS. GMRS is technically, you need a license, but just like Citizens Band, you need a license, but no one gets one. So, and it doesn't appear to be enforced, right? The Citizens Band is a
Yeah,
little
but
tough to
that's
use.
going to change probably.
It was one of my first jobs, was working in a CB radio shop back during the CB radio craze, and there was an awful lot of folks on using Citizens Radio Band then, uh, and it's pretty crowded now. It's kind of full of people just talking, but that's whatever folks want to do. It is free, and you can use up to 4 watts on Citizens Band. And so it's a little more power. It's a much lower frequency, so you can get quite a bit of range on that with a directional antenna. You can get to horizon and maybe a little bit further. So wherever the horizon is in your area.
Okay. Well, we've been on about 50 minutes or so, or over an hour, I should say, 70. Does anybody else have any questions? I mean, we're not going to resolve anything, but I just wanted to give folks an idea that alternative communication, even when the power is out, may be more feasible than we had thought. More feasible, safer, cheaper than we had thought. And I
How about walkie-talkies? Can we use those? I mean, those don't go very far.
right, right. I think that could be really important. I know there's this book.
Especially when they're battery operated too.
Oh,
Which, will help somewhat. I mean, if it's very local, that is.
well, one of the reasons, one of the ways that I was seeing walkie-talkies being used was there's a survivalist book called The Lost Ways, and one of the things he talks about is neighborhood security and the importance of
Most certainly.
yeah, of having of patrolling it. I urge people to get that. I mean, I don't agree with everything in the book, but it talks about a really um, you know, uh, end time scenario, and where nothing is working. And how do we feed ourselves? Um, how do we communicate within the area that we're likely to be able to get or give help? And anyway, so the walkie-talkie was really something he mentioned as far as patrolling a neighborhood. If you can even in your neighborhood get one other, man or woman or two, talk to everybody and get a consensus that probably be a good idea to keep our neighborhood patrolled. Maybe even put up blockades to the entrance to the neighborhood. It's not going to stop, you know, some types of attacks, but other types of attacks it may.
And what you
You know.
could do too, you could have like, say, 2, 3 blocks. One person on the other end of that block, the 2 blocks down, and then you have another set of blocks down. Doing the same thing,
Mhm.
communicating down the line. Even though you may not reach, but you may be able to reach the original sender by doing that way.
Yeah.
Possibly. I mean, I don't know how. There are logistics that probably may slow that down, but it may work in some cases.
Well, I got to tell you, if there's something I'd throw in there, Keith,
Yeah.
there are situations where low range might be a benefit.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Depending on what's happening in the world, you may not want a listening post to be able to pick up on what you're saying 3 or 4 miles away. You may want that limited range. So yeah, I kind of thought throw that thought in there.
Well, yeah, I
Uh,
yeah,
mean, it
good
might be
point.
beneficial, right?
yeah.
In that scenario.
It seems like there's just a whole lot of strengths to, being decentralized, whatever the solution, whatever the issue we're trying to address is. We've just been so accustomed in our thinking to thinking big and global and, you
Well, that's
know,
what they want everybody to be, digital, and they want everyone to go on the internet and use a
mhm,
smartphone and not think
right,
about anything else. Hmm.
right. Yeah. So if nothing else, I want people to start thinking in terms of, you know, decentralized, local solutions. Um, and I don't make anything from this, but I'm going to show you the book. It's over here. Oh, is it backwards? Is it backwards? Let's see.
Oh, I'm familiar with that book, Catherine. I've
Okay.
seen I think my brother-in-law has the book. There's another series called the Foxfire books too that kind of go into the same things that book goes into.
What is that? The
Um,
lost?
The
the
Lost
Lost
Way.
Ways.
Okay. Hmm.
Yes. And I mean, it covers more than just communication, security. Um, it has a little bit about foraging, and you know, it's kind of a nostalgic trip down the memory
Yeah,
lane.
I
Back.
saw something on there advertised about the lost ways, and it's almost like going back in things that have been so forgotten that we can still use that today. Most of the millennials won't even understand in most cases unless they get something like that.
Right. Right.
And that's important too. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, it's something people that wrote those books. I was really impressed when I saw what they knew about nutrition. I mean, there's a process called nixtamalization they used to use whenever they prepared hominy and corn. It basically soaked the corn in a solution made with water and ash, and that would break down the exterior of the corn or the hominy to release more of the nutrients. I'm not sure if you were familiar or got that far into the book or that book. I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking of the other
they have to
series.
No.
use lime.
No, like it's something called lye hominy.
Yeah.
That that was what they used to make with that, and it basically took that grain and made it a lot more nutritious because, like I said, it broke down the barriers that
Yeah.
prevented the
Yeah.
release of
I
those
know South
nutrients.
America uses that a lot, and a lot of the, especially when they have to chew leaves and things like that are used.
Mhm. But that, like I said, I was actually, it's funny. I don't think the average person grasps the knowledge that we've lost. I mean, it is not
Oh, not even
insignificant.
close. Not even close.
Right. I
Right. Right.
mean, we people, I don't know. I guess public education's got everybody into the mindset that people knew nothing back then, and the opposite of that's true. They knew a lot more than we do now. A lot of those things have been totally lost. But
Yeah, the only thing they want you to do is, use your fingers on the smartphone and go back and forth and a click away of this and that, and
mhm.
they've completely
DoorDash,
forgotten. Yeah.
there's that. Hey, somebody brings your food to you. And I don't know. It's funny. A lot of that stuff. I have family members that use a lot of those things.
Just how
And
automated can we really get? That's the real question. See,
right.
before we're not really human anymore.
I don't know about all y'all, but I've been seeing an awful lot of these automated food delivery robots in my neighborhood.
And that's another thing in restaurants. They're using them. They're using them in, I think, stores. They're using them. They're just trying to experiment to see how far they can take it. or completely eliminate the human factor.
Yeah, I
Well,
jumped in front of one of them that was going down the sidewalk to see if it would go around me, and it just stopped and waited for me to stop making
Did
faces.
you ever see the one where it cleans the commercial floors in like the UDF and places like that, gas stations? They're using them there now too, and hospitals.
right. I think that'd be something a modified Roomba or one of those that type of robotics.
Yeah, they deliver the
Um,
supplies to the hospital rooms, and they go around in the hospital with the machine, and it goes down on the elevator, and it opens up, and it's completely automated and electronic. And then they have a sign on it: "Don't get in front of it," because it has to do its thing when it has to wheel around and get around where it needs to go.
I'll tell you what's scary. If you pay attention to Boston Robotics, that company, the way they're selling this to the public, hey, look at this robot. It's anthropomorphic. It's the size of a man. It dances around and does all this. But way they stick a rifle in that robot's hand, and then I think we're going to get a really good idea how cute they are, because I don't think they're making these to sing and dance. you
That's
know,
another
I,
thing as well. They got drones making deliveries from like your local Kroger store. You know,
well,
making.
the thing is, you'd become ingrained in the convenience of it. That's almost a form of conditioning. But
Well, sure. I mean, and
and
they're promoting it.
and who knows how quickly that application could change. Hey, now this drone is now serving a military purpose. It's
Well, yeah. I
but
mean,
but they're
like
but
you
they're
just
they're getting
mentioned.
they're getting us accustomed to seeing this everywhere.
That's right.
That's
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Nothing normal about it, though. This is
No, that's for sure.
okay. Well, um, for our viewers and listeners, I wanted to just say the plan is that we're going to continue as long as we can on the second, as long as Frank is willing to help facilitate this on the second and the fourth Thursdays of each month. I apologize. The second Thursday of March, I was not able to do it because of uh, just a bureaucratic impediment to my access to the internet, basically. So um, you never know. You never know when these things are going to come up. Um, so uh, anyway, yeah, I think we had a great discussion. I hope it'll lead people to start thinking more outside the box and and think in terms of real solutions. Uh, if the future is not the way you had planned it to be, which I suspect that's what we're going to find. So um, thank you all again for being on the broadcast, and thought this was a great discussion, and you'll hope to see you again on future broadcasts and others as well. So,
yeah.
um,
I'd like to say thank you, everyone. It was actually learned some
all
things.
right.
Thanks. I always
Yep.
learn
Thank
something
you.
when I
Hmm?
get on a call with Catherine and you guys. Thanks.
Thank you. All right.
All right.
Take care, you guys, and God bless. Good night.
Great.
Take
Everybody, have a
care.
good night.
Bye. Good night. Yeah, this. Okay.